It was the morning of April 7, 2003. The Spartan Brigade of the 3rd Infantry Division Mechanized had crossed the Kuwait-Iraq border on March 20th. We had advanced to the outskirts of Baghdad on April 4th and set up assembly areas to the south of the city while we planned future operations. I was the staff sergeant with the Brigade Fire Support Cell inside the Tactical Operations Center, one of 9 fire supporters commonly known as FISTers. We were responsible for the coordination of indirect fire assets such as artillery, attack aviation, and close air support. We worked side by side as part of the brigade staff to support the maneuver units, the 2 armor and 1 infantry battalion assigned to the 2nd Brigade. On April 5th, the brigade had conducted a probing action to the airport to test the enemy defenses and resolve in what would become known as the first Thunder Run. Because of the success of the attack on the airport, the brigade commander directed the planning staff to develop a more ambitious attack into the heart of Baghdad. We moved the brigade about a half mile towards the capital to an area we would call Saints North. There was an abandoned, walled-in agricultural factory just inside the Highway 8 and Highway 1 overpass where we set up shop. It provided everything we needed: limited points of entry, space to accommodate all of our vehicles, and concealment. It also gave us an opportunity to set up some temporary sleeping quarters so we could get some much-needed rest. We had some semblance of military order. We set up the command Humvees just like we did in garrison, dress right dress in a line beside each other. We policed up the area and unpacked a day's worth of gear to relax a little. We had come out of our chemical protective garments a few days earlier. A command decision was made to drop our protective posture, and we placed our Kevlar helmets and flak vests to the side. They were within reach, but due to the high brick wall surrounding us, we felt pretty safe and secure. The rest of the brigade set up around us in neighboring fields and buildings, with the 4th Battalion 64th Armor Operations Center across the street. We maintained a good rapport with all the other operations center, and each one of those had a fire support cell, much like ours, to handle their battalion's indirect fire needs. It was at Saints North that we finalized the battle plan to put tanks into downtown Baghdad and let Baghdad Bob know that yes, we were in the city, and no, we were not bleeding to death at the city gates. It was the early hours of April 7th. In just a few moments, the assault on the heart of Baghdad would launch. Inside the compound, soldiers went about their routines. For the most part, it was a normal day, almost like in garrison or back in Kuwait during our 6-month buildup. Drivers conducted maintenance on their vehicles, caught some sleep when they could, and joked about mundane things. Inside the operations center, shift changes were occurring. The armor battalions were stacking up to launch their assault, and the infantry battalion was bringing up the rear to protect key highway exchanges once the tanks pushed through. In the operations tent, I had reported for my day shift, which sounds funny in retrospect. Reality was, I rolled out of my sleeping bag on top of the vehicle and dropped down the hatch to catch the latest. And coffee. I was always in search of a cup of coffee. I relieved Staff Sergeant Jones and Sergeant Pinnell so they could catch some rack. Somewhere in the process, the maneuver launched their assault. The night shift guys left and we got into the business of the day, working with our Air Force Tactical Air Control Party and the Army Attack Aviation Captain. My boss, the Brigade Fire Support Sergeant, Mark Groves, asked if I had seen Smitty, or Sergeant Smith, the Brigade Fire Support Officer's driver. I mentioned I thought he was out at his vehicle, one of the Humvees lined up near the entrance. Sergeant Groves said he would be right back and just wanted to check on him. We continued to track the battle, listening to the precision that one of the Armor Fire Support Officers was conducting on the radio net as he brought artillery on the key points along the route into the city. Groves returned and said he told Smitty to go get some rack inside the building where the cots were set up. Smith was just as stubborn as most fisters, and we usually just needed something to lean into to get some good sleep. I also noticed Sergeant Pinnell on top of our vehicle rummaging through his gear. The assault was the pinnacle moment from the last 7 months of planning and preparation, and no one was getting too much sleep. Tech Sergeant Kevin Butler, the Air Force liaison, said we had close air support coming on station if we needed it. We passed this on to the brigade battle captain, who acknowledged it. A few moments later, a loud sound began building up. The only way I can describe it is to imagine yourself at the airport about to take off. The jet builds its engine power up before launching itself down the runway. Imagine what that must sound like right outside the plane, because this was the sound that permeated the operations tent. The battle captain yelled at us asking, "Hey, is Cass on station right now?" I turned to Kevin, who was rapidly speaking into his mic when suddenly the world changed. I remember flying through the air. In the years following, I always added that luckily my tracked vehicle was there to stop my flight as I bounced off the ramp and rolled to the ground. You hear stories about how everything becomes silent and starts moving in slow motion. Those stories are true. When I rolled over and looked at the operations center, there was absolute chaos. Most of the tent was gone or on fire. There were soldiers lying everywhere. The tables, maps, dismounted radios, and gear were in piles. Smoke was starting to billow in. Through the tears in the canvas, I could spot a raging inferno. Slowly my hearing returned and I heard the sound of small arms fire. It is funny what the brain processes when it is overwhelmed with sensory input. At that moment, I actually thought a truck bomb had detonated and we were being attacked by Iraqi ground forces. I grabbed my flak vest, helmet, and rifle, noticing everyone else had also geared up. I saw that Sergeant Groves and our warrant officer were taking care of protecting the brigade fire support officer, and I turned to Captain Farron, who was my officer equivalent. I threw him into the track vehicle, told him not to come out, and ordered Wright, my driver, to raise the ramp so the captain had some protection. Before the ramp was raised, I grabbed the hand mic and transferred control of the fires net to the Armored Battalion Operations Center across the street. I then ran outside to assist in what I thought was a firefight. When I exited the remains of the operations tent, I got a glimpse into absolute chaos. Several of our senior NCOs were badly injured. Flames and smoke filled the air. Our non-armored Humvees were on fire. There had not been a truck bomb. This was the work of some type of missile. The crater not too far away was evidence of the attack. The sound of small arms fire was the ammunition in the Humvees instantly cooking off in the initial fireball. Soldiers were moving into mode, doing what soldiers are trained to do when under stress. Accountability of men and equipment, tending to the injured, and finding a way to continue the mission. Groves ran over to me and said, "Hey, we need to get a head count. Who had I seen?" I could account for most of the team, but had not seen my fellow Staff Sergeant, Jones, or Smitty and Pinnell. We both turned to where the Humvees were parked and noticed all of them were in flames and blown to pieces. In the flames, I saw one of the bodies of a driver burn beyond recognition. Groves and I thought the worst. I told him I would check on accountability of the rest of the team. He headed back to try and salvage what was left of our area. Running around the front of the vehicle, I found Pinnell, lying down beside the brick wall, which was not too far away from the front of the fire support track. He said he had been on top of the vehicle when the explosion occurred. Luckily, the brick wall was there to stop his flight when he was blown off the top. Leave it up to a fister to find some humor in the midst of the inferno raging around us. I helped him up and we got into the mission at hand. Coming around the corner, we bumped into Jones, leaving Smitty as the only one we didn't have a count for. Jones mentioned Smitty had been in the sleeping quarters with him and was safe. We all kind of breathed a sigh of relief. Around us was still chaos. The fire had gotten out of control. We exited the compound and ran into the company first sergeant, who was coordinating efforts to get the vehicles out of the fire. He was directing a tank recovery vehicle to smash through one of the perimeter walls so we could get our vehicles out of the firestorm. Moments later, the wall was breached and two vehicles emerged. One was the operations track, followed by the fire support track, which was driven by our warrant officer. I directed him to pull beside the ops track and found the battle captain. Our warrant officer went back towards the rescue operations. We had drilled so much with the operations section that we were on autopilot at this time. They directed the maneuver, we controlled the artillery. Everyone else supported what our two teams did. I had the ramp lowered on our vehicle. It came down, and sitting inside the vehicle was Captain Farron. I remember giggling and asking what he was doing. He said, "Sarge, you told me to stay on the track." It was just one of those absolute hoo-ah Army moments. We grabbed backup antennas from on top of the vehicle and got to the business of what we did best, establishing a light operations center, putting up communications, and getting back into the fight. A few moments passed and I grabbed the hand mic to the radio and said, "Tusker 30 November, Spartan 30 X-ray. We are back up and can track the fight. Update on Curly requested, over." You could hear the relief on the other side when Sergeant First Class Kester replied, "Spartan 30 X-ray, Tusker 30 November, acknowledged. How are you doing? Over." From the time the missile struck until that moment, a total of 45 minutes had passed. It seemed like a lifetime. This would be the first of several significant events for the Spartan Brigade that day. The Battle of Objective Curly was in its beginning stages. The defense of the 315 Infantry's Operations Center against a determined Fedayeen and Iraqi Army attack was just beginning. The battle for downtown Baghdad was also starting as the tanks from 164 Armored Battalion and 464 Armored Battalion arrived at the palaces and parade field. We lost 3 soldiers and 2 civilian reporters at the Brigade Operations Center that day. Several of us were wounded, some to the extent that their time in battle ended as they were medevaced out of the area. Mitchell, the executive officer's driver, Brown, the brigade commander's Humvee driver, and Miller, the mechanic who spent many a late night making sure our vehicle could get down the road, gave the ultimate sacrifice. We held a time-honored military remembrance ceremony a couple of days later before we pulled out of Saints and went downtown to the palace. We remembered the legacy of our fallen comrades and vowed to never forget the sacrifice from April 7th. Across the brigade, other units were doing the same to honor fellow soldiers who fell that day. We each took a turn to talk about a memory or a recollection of those fallen. We took a moment of silence and then moved on with the mission. Within the hour, we would pull into the front gates of Saddam's palace and start a new mission, putting Saints behind us, but always keeping a place in our heart and soul of that eventful day. As I have told others, a moment lasts all of a second, but a memory lasts forever. Looking back, I would not trade anything for the events of that day. I cannot, because who I am today is a direct reflection of my experiences. What I can do is ask that everyone put aside politics, reasons for whether we should have been there or not, and understand the bond shared by ordinary people who experienced extraordinary things. Enjoy each day and be thankful for the little things. Take care, my friends. It was an honor to share the sand with every one of you. Spartan 30 X-Ray, out.